Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The great hall of Harper Manor shone beneath crystal chandeliers, reflecting every ray of light in an almost surreal shimmer. Tables covered with crisp white tablecloths, adorned with bouquets of roses and peonies, stretched as far as the eye could see. Guests, dressed in their finest, whispered excitedly, waiting for Emily Johnson, the bride, to make her entrance. Emily walked down the aisle, her veil delicately draped over her shoulders, her trembling hands clutching the bouquet she had chosen with such care. Her eyes, usually full of gaiety, reflected a worry that no ceremony could mask. Each step seemed to take her further from a security she had never truly found with Richard Harper, her future husband. Richard was waiting for her at the altar. His impeccable black suit and intense gaze inspired both admiration and unease. He had always been charismatic, but tonight there was something in his eyes that sent shivers down the spines of those closest to him, a glint of impatience, almost suppressed anger. When Emily finally arrived before him, the silence in the room was palpable. The violins were playing a soft melody, but this harmony was suddenly broken by a sharp sound, a slap. Richard had just struck Emily full in the face. A muffled scream rippled through the audience. The stunned guests didn't know whether to scream, intervene, or flee. The shock was complete, such an act had never been seen in this room. Emily, knocked down but still conscious, looked up. The physical pain burned, but the pain of betrayal and humiliation was far worse. Around her, the whispers turned to gasps of horror. Some guests turned pale, others averted their eyes, unable to watch this scene of violence in broad daylight. And then, a heavy silence fell. Everyone waited for her reaction, thinking she would remain broken. But in Emily's eyes, an unsuspected strength could be seen. Behind her tears, a secret buried for years was beginning to emerge. A secret that would not only reveal Richard's true nature, but also shatter the Harper family's perfect facade. This wedding, intended as a fairy tale, was about to turn into a drama from which no one would emerge unscathed. The sound of the slap still echoed through the great hall as the guests stood there frozen, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Emily, red-faced and teary-eyed, took a few steps back, supported by her best friend, Sophie Miller. "Emily, are you okay?" Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. Emily took a deep breath, trying to control her sobs. Her heart was pounding, but she knew she couldn't panic. Richard stood straight, his face ashen, his eyes flashing with anger and defiance. "How dare you look at me like that in front of everyone?" Richard spat, his voice cold. The guests murmured among themselves, some whispering to their neighbors, "That's crazy, he hit the bride," others trying to find an excuse to slip away discreetly. Emily felt a dull anger rising within her. Everyone saw her as the fragile bride, but no one knew how much she had suffered since agreeing to this marriage. She had hidden her doubts, her worries, everything to preserve the perfect image Richard and his family wanted to project. "You are not the man I thought you were, Richard," she said in a firm, trembling but resolute voice. Richard stiffened, surprised. No one had ever spoken to him like that. His fake smile froze. "What are you talking about?" he said, trying to regain his control. Emily took a deep breath. The entire room was watching her now, all hanging on her every word. This was the moment. The moment she would reveal a truth Richard had thought he could bury, a secret that would shock the Harper family and change the course of this day forever. "Before you hit me, maybe you should have listened to what I have to say, and you would have discovered who you really are." An icy silence fell over the room. The guests leaned forward, captivated. No one expected this fragile bride to suddenly become the center of a drama they would never forget. Emily knew her life was about to change, but for the first time in a long time, she felt she was in control. She was no longer the victim. She was going to fight. The silence in the room was stifling. All eyes were on Emily, who was slowly catching her breath, her face red from the slap but lit by a newfound determination. "Richard," she said, clenching her fists, "I can no longer remain silent. This marriage, it was never real to me." a murmur ran through the room. The guests exchanged worried and curious glances. Richard frowned, his arrogance wavering for the first time. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Emily took her bouquet and hugged it. Then, in a clear but trembling voice, she began to reveal the secret she had kept for months. "I know everything, Richard. Everything you did to manipulate me, everything your family hides behind their polite smiles, and most of all, I know what you did to Samantha, my sister." At the mention of her sister's name, some of the guests exchanged shocked glances. Samantha was known to be a close friend of the Harper family, and no one suspected she had been a victim of Richard. "How dare you?" Richard yelled, his face turning red with anger. But Emily continues, implacable. "You thought no one would ever find out the truth. But I have proof, Richard. Proof that you tried to destroy Samantha, just for your own benefit. And I'm not going to stand by and let you beat me up in front of all these people." The guests were stunned. Phones were pulled out to record, hands were raised, but no one dared to intervene. The air was thick with tension, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Richard, unsettled, took a step back. His perfect facade of a charming groom had crumbled in a matter of seconds. Rage and fear mingled in his eyes. Emily, seeing that she was in control, took a step forward. "This marriage is over, Richard. And you will answer for your actions. In front of everyone." An even heavier silence fell over the room. Then, a timid but determined voice spoke up. "Emily's right," said Sophie Miller, stepping up to Emily's side. "It's time for the truth to come out." Richard opened his mouth to retort, but he already knew he had lost this battle. The bride, who had seemed fragile just moments before, had just become a force no one could resist. The entire room was preparing for a confrontation that would exceed all their expectations. And Emily knew this was just the beginning. The silence that hung over the room was broken by a collective murmur. The guests exchanged anxious glances in disbelief. Richard, red with anger and humiliation, clenched his fists, while Emily stood straight, her blazing eyes defying anyone who dared to contradict her. "You think I'm afraid of you?" Emily spat. "You've spent months manipulating me, making me doubt myself. But that's enough. I'm not who you think I am, Richard Harper." Richard took a step forward, but his voice trembled in spite of himself. "What are you talking about, Emily? You have no proof." Emily slowly took an envelope out of her clutch and handed it to Sophie. "Sophie, show them. Now." Sophie stepped forward and opened the envelope in front of everyone. Inside were photos, messages, and documents detailing all of Richard's manipulations, lies, and intimidation. Each page revealed a truth more shocking than the last. "It's impossible," a guest murmured, her eyes wide. Richard paled, realizing his facade had crumbled. His previously silent relatives now looked at him with disbelief mixed with shame. His father, Thomas Harper, a powerful and respected businessman, frowned. "Richard, is that true?" Thomas asked in a deep voice. Richard looked down, unable to answer. Emily felt a surge of courage wash over her. "Yes, Dad, it's true. Richard deceived everyone. He tried to destroy my sister, to manipulate me, and he will stop at nothing to protect his interests." The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. Some guests turned away in shock, others took photos to document the scene. But what came next would shock even more. Emily looked up at Richard, determined. "And that's not all. You're not just a manipulator. You're hiding something much more serious, something I'm going to reveal now, in front of everyone." Richard felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had always believed that some secrets would remain buried. But Emily, whom he had underestimated, had just proven him wrong. The guests held their breath, anticipating the next revelation. And Emily knew it was going to be a complete shock. What happened next would not only destroy the wedding, but also shake the entire Harper family, leaving everyone in a complete stupor. The silence had become almost suffocating. Every guest held their breath, their eyes fixed on Emily and the envelope Sophie still held in her hands. Richard, his hands shaking, felt his anger turn to fear. He had always believed that some secrets would remain buried, until now. Emily took a deep breath, and with a shaky but determined voice, she said, "Richard Harper, you didn't just try to manipulate my family and harm my sister, you also embezzled funds from the family business. Millions you thought you were hiding behind your rigged deals and contracts." A murmur of horror rippled through the room. The guests exchanged shocked glances. Even some of Richard's close friends were stunned, unable to believe that the man they considered a model of success could be involved in such a betrayal. "That's not true," Richard yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "You can't prove that." Emily smiled sadly, but with a glimmer of triumph. "Oh yes. It's all there, Richard. The bank documents, the illegal transfers. It's all recorded. And now everyone knows the truth." Thomas Harper, Richard's father, turned pale and spoke in a deep voice. "Richard, is that true?" Richard looked away, unable to respond. Shame and fear contorted his face, as the shocked guests began to whisper among themselves. Some filmed the scene with their phones, while others muttered words of disbelief. Emily, sensing that the moment was crucial, took a step forward. "This marriage is over, Richard. And it's not just you I'm denouncing, but also the whole facade of perfection you've created to deceive everyone." At these words, the tension in the room reached its peak. Some guests stood up, others remained frozen. But everyone understood that this perfect wedding had just been shattered. "Emily, you have no idea what you're doing," Richard whispered, his voice almost pleading. Emily, with a proud and determined look, replied, "Oh, yes, Richard. I know exactly what I'm doing. And for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to protect my family and the truth, rather than protecting a man who deserves nothing but dishonor." The entire room held its breath, because everyone knew this was just the beginning of a fall that would be public, brutal, and unforgettable. Richard, pale and trembling, felt anger wash over him. He had always been used to being in control of situations, but never had he found himself so exposed, humiliated in front of all these witnesses. "You can't do this to me," he cried, his voice rising in a mixture of rage and panic. He lunged toward Emily, thinking to threaten or intimidate her, but before he could make a move, Sophie Miller stepped between them, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Back off, Richard. You have no control here anymore." The shocked guests murmured as they watched the once powerful man face a wall of courage. Some picked up their phones to record, others remained silent, unable to look away from the drama. Emily, motionless but determined, fixed Richard with an icy stare. "You thought you could control everything, but you underestimated one thing, the truth. And it always has the last word." Richard, furious, tried to grab the documents Sophie was holding. But at that moment, Thomas Harper, her father, stepped forward, looking stern. "Richard," he said in a firm, authoritative voice. "You no longer have any authority here. I want you to calm down immediately." Richard stepped back, stunned. His father had never confronted him like this in public. The contrast was striking. Emily and her allies now held the moral high ground, while Richard appeared to be the exposed and powerless man he truly was. Emily took this moment to speak, her voice echoing throughout the room. "Richard, you've had years to hide your actions, to manipulate, intimidate, and control. But today, everything is falling apart. And in front of these witnesses, you're finally facing the truth." An icy silence fell. All the guests understood that the wedding was nothing more than a shattered facade. The groom, once a symbol of charm and success, was now a shadow of his former self, defeated by his own arrogance. Then Emily took another step towards the exit. "This marriage is over. Richard, you have no more rights here." Richard turned away without a word. His attempt at retaliation had failed. The drama had reached its first peak, and the entire room was now witnessing an unforgiving truth: Emily had taken control, and nothing would ever be the same again. The emotional uproar at the reception had finally calmed. The guests, still in shock, murmured among themselves, some in tears, others angry or stunned. Emily, though exhausted by the intensity of the events, felt a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in years, she was no longer a prisoner of Richard and his manipulations. Sophie accompanied him into a small adjacent room, away from prying eyes. "Emily," Sophie murmured, "you were amazing. I've never seen anyone stand up to Richard like that." Emily smiled weakly, wiping away her tears. "Thank you, Sophie. But this is only the beginning. There is still much to reveal." At that moment, Michael Bennet, a former colleague of Richard, approached timidly. "Emily, I think you should check this out," he said, holding out a USB drive. "I discovered some additional information about Richard's fraud." Emily carefully took the key and slipped it into her bag. She knew that behind every revelation there was a risk, but she felt the truth had to come out in full. "Thank you, Michael. With this, everyone will know exactly who he is," she murmured. A few hours later, the reception hall was empty. Richard, humiliated, had silently left. The guests were still quietly discussing what they had just witnessed. But for Emily, the most important thing was not Richard's humiliation, but the path to justice and rebuilding her life. "I want everyone to know," Emily said, looking at Sophie determinedly. "Richard can never hurt my family again." Sophie nodded. "You'll make it. You're strong, Emily. Stronger than him and anyone who thought they could control you." Emily took a deep breath. She knew the next few days would be intense. The revelations would continue, and the Harper family would not remain silent in the face of Richard's public humiliation. But this time, Emily wouldn't be alone. She had allies, evidence, and most importantly, the certainty that she was fighting for the truth. As she left the room, Emily looked back at the lights of the mansion one last time. This place, once a symbol of perfection and lies, would now become the scene of justice and truth. And nothing and no one could stop it. The next day, Emily rose early, her heart heavy but resolute. The slap, the revelations, and Richard's humiliation were now memories. Now she had to act against the ramifications of her actions, and above all, protect her family and her sister Samantha. Accompanied by Sophie and Michael, Emily went to the office of Thomas Harper, the family patriarch. The tension was palpable. Thomas, sitting behind his imposing mahogany desk, looked up when Emily entered. "Emily, what are you doing here so early?" he asked, intrigued but cautious. "Mr. Harper," Emily said firmly, "it's time you knew the whole truth about Richard. He's not just a manipulative husband, he's a fraud and a criminal who deceived your family for years." Thomas frowned. "Emily, you're exaggerating." Emily placed the USB drive on the desk, sliding it towards him. "It's all there. The evidence of financial embezzlement, the messages, the falsified contracts, every document proves my point. And if you do nothing, Richard will continue to harm others." Thomas took the key and examined it, his eyes widening as he realized the extent of his son's betrayal. The silence in the office was heavy, oppressive, as if the room were holding its breath. "Richard, my son," he murmured, incredulous. Emily showed no emotion, only relentless determination. "You must act now, Mr. Harper. For Samantha, for me, and for the truth. Don't let Richard get away with this." Thomas nodded slowly. For the first time, Emily felt she had the patriarch's support. But she knew Richard wouldn't back down. He would retaliate, and her family could split. Sophie, seeing the tension, whispered, "Emily, are you ready for what's coming?" Emily took a deep breath. "Yes. This is just the beginning. We must hit hard and hit true. The truth must come out, no matter the cost." Outside, the mansion's lights shone, once symbolizing power and illusion. Now they were silent witnesses to a battle for justice, led by Emily, a bride who refused to remain a victim and who transformed chaos into strength. The war with Richard and the Harper family had just begun. And Emily knew that no secret could stay hidden for long. Richard Harper had never faced a situation where he felt completely powerless. After the public revelation, he spent the night brooding, searching for a way to regain control. He couldn't stand humiliation, especially in front of his family and influential colleagues. The next morning, he went to his father's office, determined to minimize the damage. "Dad," he whispered, "there are things you need to know. Emily exaggerates everything." Thomas Harper looked up from his documents, his expression grave. "Richard, I saw you yesterday. I believe Emily. And I want the truth, not your lies." Richard felt panic rising, but he couldn't give up. He needed to find a loophole, a way to discredit Emily and her evidence. Meanwhile, Emily, aware that Richard would not remain inactive, had taken the lead. Along with Sophie and Michael, she had begun preparing a preemptive counterattack. The evidence, compiled on several USB drives and documents, was ready to be shared with the media and authorities if Richard attempted the slightest manipulation. When Richard tried to influence Thomas, Emily burst into the office, calm but determined. "Richard, stop lying. Every piece of evidence you've tried to hide is in our hands. And this time, there's no way to twist the truth." Richard, furious and panicked, tried to grab a file. But Sophie, with unexpected speed, stopped him. "No way. You have no control anymore, Richard." Tensions rose. Richard, flushed with anger, realized his plans were failing at every step. Emily's determined and organized allies were neutralizing every one of his attempts. "You'll never win, Richard," Emily said, her voice echoing through the office. "You underestimated our strength and determination. And now everyone will know who you really are." At that moment, Michael sent an email to all of Richard's important contacts, with copies of the incriminating documents. Within minutes, the evidence was in the hands of journalists and lawyers, sealing Richard's fate. Richard felt his world crumble. His reputation, his authority, and even his family's respect were destroyed. Emily watched, motionless and calm, knowing that justice had finally arrived. The days that followed were a nightmare for Richard Harper. The documents and evidence compiled by Emily and Michael had been passed on to the authorities and the media. Word spread quickly: fraud, manipulation, embezzlement, everything Richard had tried to hide was now public. Silence reigned in Harper Manor. Thomas Harper, furious but lucid, confronted his son. "Richard, you've ruined your life and tarnished this family's name. How could you do that?" Richard bowed his head, unable to answer. He had lost all credibility, and for the first time in his life, he had no control over the situation. The wedding reception hall, which had been the scene of his initial humiliation, remained etched in his memory as a symbol of his defeat. Emily, for her part, was beginning to breathe freely. Not only had she revealed the truth, but she had also protected her sister and her family. Samantha, who was at her side, kissed her on the cheek. "Thank you, Emily, you saved us." Along with Sophie and Michael, Emily decided to make all the evidence public. Newspapers, television stations, and social media reported Richard Harper's spectacular fall. Wedding guests, colleagues, and even family friends were stunned to discover the extent of Richard's lies and manipulation. For Richard, each publication was a new humiliation. His friends shunned him, his business partners withdrew, and even his own family began to distance themselves. The law was about to intervene, and his future looked bleak. But for Emily, it was the beginning of a new life. She had regained control of her destiny, proven her strength, and shown that truth could triumph over manipulation and violence. The wedding, once a symbol of lies, had been transformed into a public lesson in courage and justice. As she left the manor for the last time, Emily looked up at the sky, feeling for the first time in a long time a true sense of freedom. The humiliated bride was gone, a strong, determined woman had been born. A few weeks after Richard's fall, Emily walked through a park bathed in morning sunlight. The fresh air seemed to cleanse every thought, every memory of the previous weeks. She was no longer the fragile bride humiliated in front of all her guests. She had become a strong woman, master of her own destiny. Samantha, smiling, approached her. Emily, look what you've accomplished, you've turned chaos into victory. Emily smiled, her heart light. It's not just me, Samantha. It's all of us, the truth has given us our strength. The media continued to report on Richard's case, which left him isolated and discredited in the world of business and high society. Attempts at rehabilitation were in vain, the truth had finally come out. Emily decided it was time to move on completely. She moved into a bright, city apartment and began working on projects she'd always dreamed of but had had to put on hold because of Richard. She surrounded herself with loyal and sincere people, ready to build a life with her based on trust and honesty. One evening, as she watched the city glitter through her apartment window, Emily thought about everything that had happened, the humiliations, the slap, the public revelations. Each ordeal had made her stronger, more aware of her worth and her courage. "I'll never let someone like him control me again," she whispered with a determined smile. Sophie, sitting next to her, raised her glass. To Emily, the woman who dared to face lies, betrayal, and humiliation, and won. Emily raised her glass in turn. To truth, to courage, and to a new beginning. Richard's past was behind her, and before her lay a future full of promise, freedom, and success. The humiliated bride was gone, replaced by an invincible woman, ready to write her own story, free from manipulation and lies. And for Emily Johnson, each new day was a victory over the past, a reminder that strength, courage, and truth always triumph.